I did one of these tutorials a couple of months ago with some Xbox Series X renders, and it actually went down really well. You guys responded to it really, really well, and you were able to pick apart the value from it. So I'm doing it again today. I recorded this prime render that I made a couple of weeks ago, and I feel like I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage because I recorded it a couple of weeks ago, whereas with the Xbox One I recorded it then literally the day after I recorded the video. But what I want to do is break apart the process as I'm going through it. So at the beginning here, this is just me in an initial kind of Lookdev phase. I cut most of that out because the juicy part of this tutorial is in this new scene here as I'm copying the assets into the new scene. I did have some previous Lookdev scenes from this, but I was still doing a little bit more on it before I dove into the main scene here. And I did have a reference for this too, and I'll pop that up on the screen. I can't remember the guy's name, but it was a Logitech render, and I came across it on Behance, and I really, really liked the framing, and I really liked the way that the model looked on the rocks. So I took a good bit of inspiration from that. So thank you for creating that work there. And really, scenes like this, they're quite natural to me now, but I feel like it's very good to pick apart the process because scenes like this can be quite scary to people. And I like to often think about it. There's this like Jordan Peele quote, which is really cool. He says, the first draft you're ever making, he's got complete awareness that all he's really doing is shoveling sand into a box so you can build sandcastles from it later. And I think that that is so cool whenever you're building any kind of scene that has a lot of complexity in it. Because if you just start throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks, you can come back and change that later. So when I'm building up a scene with many assets, what I'm often doing is just using one asset and throwing it around and letting the complexity build itself rather than trying to focus on the complexity from the beginning and then causing a bunch of activation energy and a bunch of procrastination because it feels like it's going to be bigger than it is usually if you just start with something as simple as possible. That's why I try to encourage everybody I coach to keep things at the center of the scene and keep your camera at the center of the scene. You do all these things, you remove so much energy from yourself when it comes to worrying about composition and worrying about how you're going to build things because of a lot of it builds itself. That's also why I like to work in split view panels and have Octane responding to one camera while I'm moving about in the other. What that does is just eliminate a lot of obstacles and makes your process a lot more fluent. So to speak about the actual render and what I'm actually doing, now I'm just picking megascans, and I knew I wanted similar rocks to the reference, but I wasn't entirely sure. So I think I was going for some Icelandic type ones, although it says it's the Heartland Quay Shore, but I'm pretty sure I end up on the Icelandic ones. And unlike my Xbox renders with these ones, there wasn't as many issues in the scene, but there was still certainly a lot of decision making going on and different things I was going back and forth with. And this took me about 2 hours. Now I've bumped it up about 250% and then cut certain parts out. So it's going to come out in about half an hour. I think it's running a little bit more quickly than the Xbox video that I did. Now I just had to re-import the asset here because I re-imported it into Redshift by accident. So I'm re-importing it back into Octane. And you can see here that everything's super centered. I'm keeping everything really, really centered. So I'll probably chapter this bit as general workflow. And what I'm doing, first of all, is adding in a light. And I'm going to run two different lights. So I'm going to run a light for the Megascan itself, and I'm going to run a light for the Prime Can. So I tend to do this a lot because the lights themselves are going to need different parameters as they're two completely different objects. So we're going to need a more powerful light and then a softer light for the Prime Can, because you can see that that light looks great on the rocks but doesn't look so good on the Prime Can. So I'm going to use a light ID to do that. I'm going to make the Prime Can ignore this main light, and I'm going to have, as you see, I'm calling that 1 there, and I'm dropping in another one and calling it 2. I tend to do that a little bit just because it aligns with light IDs. And then I'm going to put fall off on the second light, and I'm going to have the Prime Can listen to that but not have the rock listen to that. And you can see there that's going to create a much nicer look, but it still looks like it's coming from the same light source. And the bulk of this render was really playing with the rocks and figuring out what I wanted to do. And I think that's another important thing when you've got references, is to not lean into the reference too much, but take a general outline of it and then move with that. So now I'm messing with another light for the rocks to try and get some light underneath it, because the reference did have that, but I wasn't paying too much attention to that really. And I'm already messing with bringing in a couple of other rocks into the scene. And it wasn't till quite late in the process as well that I actually decided I wanted multiple Prime Cans in the scene, and there's some cool little tricks that I did there. that I'm quite excited to share with you in as to how I made the render pop in the way that I did. But the bulk of this really is going to be me playing with the rocks and then tailoring the materials and then coming back in and adding more details in towards the end. And just while not much is going on here, I do want to encourage you to follow me on Patreon and subscribe over there. I'm posting more in-detail tutorials over there, more complicated ones where I can show my process a lot more naturally and do series of renders and whatnot. So definitely go check that out. So you can see already, just with a couple of assets, we've got a pretty cool look going on. And what I'm doing here is I'm messing with the gradient on the background. So the scene itself is composed right now of a couple of lights. We've got HDRI for the reflections in the can, and then we've got a background. And I didn't stay with this blue look because it didn't really fit, but what I'm actually doing is turning the gradient towards the lights, which again is giving a more cohesive feel. And because the primary lights are coming from one direction, so if you have the gradient set towards that as well, it's just going to create a more kind of inclusive feel and blend everything together in a nice way. And I remember getting frustrated with this because I was just moving around the rocks without much direction. But that's really the process, isn't it? It's just moving everything around until you find something that fits well. And I think learning that point of when it fits well is important, and understanding when it's at a point that you want it to be at. And I think that's quite a hard feeling to describe, but as you understand your own workflow and the way that you work and the way you want your work to turn out, you definitely become very attuned to when you're hitting that point and when you're not. It's kind of like a weird gut feeling inside of you. You just know when you're not on that mark versus when you are on it. And, like I've mentioned a couple of times now, the bulk of this process really is just moving the megascans, changing the materials a bit, moving the lights around, moving the megascans, changing the materials, moving the lights around. Just kind of the same thing for the bulk here. So I'll chapterize this. So if you're getting bored with any particular part of the process, you can move to the bits that have a bit more substance of raw value. But you might even just find this entertaining, me working away here. And I definitely went back and forth with the colors of the cans as well. That's why I was doing so much Lookdev at the beginning. And, although I've cut most of that out because it didn't really have any utility, I always do it with renders, and when I'm coaching people, I get them to get into the habit of doing Lookdev as well. And I think it's so valuable to have this kind of host file where you've got a very flushed out asset that you can then delegate into other scenes. And here you can see me duplicating the can now and trying to make the scene look a little bit more busy. And this is where it gets interesting, because I actually ended up putting another light on the back of the can. I think I ended up with 3 cans. And I ended up putting another light on the back of the cans that the mega scans were ignoring, which gave the cans a really, really nice pop and a glow, which I was very happy with. So you can see I've got a couple of different colors in the scene as well. I've got red, pink, and blue. I brought all of them over just because I really didn't know which one I was going to use. So again, that's kind of the importance of having a Lookdev file, because if you've then got the kind of strenuous activity of doing this all in one file, and then you've got to go and create another color and then make sure that looks good and make sure the colors hold up. If you've already done all of that in another file, I think it's very easy to just port them over and have everything ready for you. And I tend to do a lot of Lookdev in cloner scenes as well, because of the kind of complexity cloners can add, especially with reflective objects. But it's just a really nice way to see the light hitting it at different angles and make sure that every part of the model is holding up. I remember being a bit torn between how much I wanted it to backlight, and I like with Megascans, I try not to do it all the time just so not all my renders look the same, but I like to do this like sparkly black rock. I've actually got a tutorial for it on my Patreon, so I'll link that as well if you're interested. And that's me doing it now, actually, is I'm pumping in a bunch of noise into the rock, and then you put that into the bump, and then you duplicate the noise and you put it into the roughness. And if you choke it out just right on the gamma, you need to keep the noise really, really simple. If you choke it out just right on the gamma, you're going to get these like really, really nice sparkles. But to get them to show up properly, you need to have most of the lighting coming from the back of the object. But I didn't want everything to just be outlined. So you can see me wrestling with that a little bit. Once you learn how to get these the noise to a certain point, just where you can get the sparkles coming out of it, it's a lot of fun. I really like pumping in a lot of extra detail there using noise. And you can see just the difference in that front rock between the back rocks. The front one, even just with the noise and the bump, let alone not, you know, it doesn't have the sparkles yet, but just having the added detail on that rock, it brings everything to life a little bit that the ones without it don't have. So whenever I'm working with rocks and Megascans, not in every scene, but in a lot of them I do add in that noise, and you can see the sparkles coming into play now, and it certainly looks cool. And then I'm gonna have to go and do that in the I think this is the good part about using a very few amount of assets too, because I'm only using 2 different rocks right now. That means I don't have 5 different materials. So, you know, usually I would try to use one material as much as use one asset as much as I can, because then I'm not, you know, working with 2 or 3 different materials. And if I decide I want to change the color of one asset, then I have to go through 4 or 5 different Megascans and change them all. So, you know, it's not too much work to just go into the other material and change that. And I think already now this is probably after about 45 minutes in, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, probably a bit longer. And I'm messing with different colors now, and I feel like I'm itching closer to the point where I'm happy with it, but it's still definitely just not there yet. And I think when I start bringing in that second can and multiple different angles, it really starts coming to life a little bit. So what I'm doing now, as well as messing with a square aspect ratio, is sometimes I think building a scene, you know, you want it to look good in wide and square, and sometimes I find working with a square, especially because on socials that's what we're using a lot these days, I find moving into a square composition, it can release a little bit of weight from, you know, creating the render and building the composition, and just make it a little bit stricter and kind of easier to see what's going on in different places. Now I think I'm fluffing everything out a little bit too much at this point, and I think I dial back from that. I think I realize I'm just working with too many duplicates and too many objects, and you'll see me at this point kind of just diving back and forth between the white or the square. I end up pushing everything to the left of the scene, and I think that worked really, really well, and centered everything in a nice way. And this just felt a little bit too simple, having everything so straight on. So you can see me kind of changing that now. Again, it's still just Megascan play and composition building. Like I said earlier, throwing sand into a box and then building from that after. You know, we're even releasing from it as well. Sometimes you have too much sand. Sometimes you throw in too much, and then you need to dial it back and kind of course correct yourself. And you can see here, this is where it really starts folding in. Now everything's feeling like one big rock. I think that's definitely what you want. And it's cool with these Megascans that you can just sort of merge them together and blend them together, and they're going to float together really nicely. And once I put that second can lying down there and I see the reflections, I see the way it looks, I'm like, okay, right, I'm going to move forward with this. And I'm trying to release myself from the reference a little bit now, and kind of not paying so much attention to that, and taking forward what I've got and just running with my own momentum. But I think it's so cool to see this. Yeah, I can make a tutorial and I can lay everything out for you and make it really simple, and you can follow that along really easily and get the result. But seeing me in the decisions and rotating something to see if it looks good tilted, or just, you know, being in the actual workflow, I think you can pull a lot of value from that. And a couple of seconds ago I was actually just stretching out the can a little bit just to see if it looked a little bit better in the frame, but I ended up moving away from it. And now I'm adding some glare. So if you go into the post-processing tag in the Octane camera and you set the glare angle to like 90 or 0 or whatever, you can get some like little glare streaks that are in a very, very straight line. And I've already got that backlight in the back of the cans now, and that really comes to life when I add in the third can. But now the composition's really shaping up. And I also add some grass, and I scatter some grass over the rocks towards the end as well. And that was something I definitely wanted to do because the reference did have that. So towards the end I do that, but that doesn't take too long to set up at all. Now I remember not liking that white highlight on the horizontal cam. Wasn't very keen on that at all. And I'm not very keen on the light on the bottom. So I'm trying to induce a little bit more shadow and try and get a little bit more of those sparkles to show. I'm quite bad for making everything a bit dark. Having a lot of dark shadows kind of cast over everything. I'm messing with the scales of the cans here as well. You're just seeing me just make different decisions and see what looks good and what doesn't, and trying and failing and then doing it over and over. And yeah, this is where I ended up staying with the red cans. Well, I'm trying the pink ones, but I ended up staying with the red ones. I think I pushed them quite a bit closer together as well. And you can see that although the composition is leaning to the left in the live view, everything's still very centered in the world, and I kind of preach to people to make sure that you're building scenes like that. Because I certainly remember when I was a novice years and years ago, and I would build a scene like 50 meters off to the right of the on the x-axis or something. It was very strange. And then when it came to animating cameras and stuff, it was always a pain. And I think a lot of that just comes down to being self-taught and learning things in unconventional ways, you know. Now I've dropped in some grass. Now I only use a couple of different assets from that, and I usually shove them off to the side and then take a couple of different ones. And what I've actually done there is I've duplicated all the rocks, merged them together, turned them off. Because there's so many different versions of them, you know, there's about 5 there. So if I duplicate it, merge them together, turn it off, I can then use that to sketch at the grass across all of them at once. And in the grass material, all I'm really doing is desaturating it and adding a little bit of the transmission as well. And then what I do from there is just add a little bit of noise. And I'm also having to make that listen to the light that's hitting the rocks as well, and have it ignoring the lights that's hitting the prime cans. And then just add in some noise and some variation. And it certainly doesn't take too long to set up. And make sure you add in your rotation through a random effector. So all the grass individual pieces are at completely different rotations. They'll add a lot of realism. And I don't want the blades being too thick. And you have to make sure your normal align is at the right value as well. So when it's turning vertically down different parts of the model, that it's, you know, it'll just stay straight unless you fix the normal align. I'll always try to point itself up. Or it's the other way around. I can't quite remember. But it doesn't take too long to get the grass set up. But there's a little bit on the corner there you can see it's just kind of not sitting totally right. Just because the asset itself from Megascans, it comes in like a little patch of grass. So you kind of have to be careful with how you're scaling it and stuff. So it looks realistic at every single angle. But really just messing with the seed and the normal align, you can kick that into place quite easily. As you can see, you can just find a little variation there where it's not happening, and then that problem's gone. And although I'm back on the blue, I do come back to the red. But I'm always, you know, testing different looks and seeing what works. And I think this is just me kind of following the reference quite closely and seeing the kind of saturations that he had on his image and whatnot. So I'm trying a little bit of pink, and then do end up falling back into the red. And you can see I've got quite a few different sky backgrounds that I've set up that are in different colors in case I'm going back and forth between all of them. But to me the red popped the nicest against the dark background. I'm messing with the saturations a lot as well. I'm using photographic LUTs in the camera, so I'm not using aces or anything. And this is where it really comes to life, is me messing with these prime cans here and adding in the third one that's kind of leaning over the back of all of them. Sometimes I think that, you know, I'll try to build scenes with one asset, and then towards the end, I did that with my Logitech renders as well, towards the end I'll just start duplicating them and adding in others. It's never really something that I go into the render to begin with in mind that that's what I'm going to do. And we definitely get that misconception a lot. We'll see a render on Instagram or Behance and we'll always think that everybody else always has it super planned out, and we don't really. So now this is interesting actually. This is a friend of mine, Brand, I've been working with for a while, and I'm going to start using these assets on Patreon to make some cool tutorials from. And I'd made the assets a couple days before, so I thought, oh, you know what, let me try them in this scene and see if it actually looks better than the prime can. And then I thought, oh, you know what, I'll save it for another time. But I thought it'd be interesting to see nonetheless and see how it came out since I'd made the assets. So I tend to do that a lot as well. You know, I'm building this big scene based on a product, and then sometimes I remember I did that with my iPad render. I just built the whole thing with a PS5 controller, and then like in the last 20 minutes of the render, I just took out the controller and put it in the iPad, and it looked way better. So I just ended up going with that. But you know, you really only have that ability when you're making renders for Instagram or just a fun little render. You know, of course, if you're working for a client or you're absolutely certain on the model that you want to use, you can't really do that. You have to stick to your guns and use the asset that you've picked. But you know, I built the scene around the prime can render, so I just thought, okay, I'm gonna stay on that for now. I wanted to add a highlight on the horizontal one, so I added in another light. Me having 5 lights in a scene, that's a lot for me. Because we're working with light IDs, you know, we're not getting that much noise. When you have a lot of light interaction, if I wasn't using light IDs right now, we'd be getting tons of noise in the scene from all the different light bounces and the different refractions and the indirect light. You'd be getting a lot of noise. So by using light IDs, you sustain a completely clean render. As you can see, there's no visible noise right now. So using light IDs for that is so useful, and you just have to set up in a correct way that you're getting a realistic image, of course, and something that looks artistic. At the same time, I think it's good to sacrifice realism in some ways, and you know, I just lean into an art-directed image. So I've got that highlight in the back of the cans now, and I think I added in a universal camera here. No, I haven't, or have I? I may have, but I'm just messing with some aspect ratios and some camera work. It's not something I always do, but sometimes I do it a little bit. I always add a little bit of depth of field as well, just add some realism. So here you go, and yeah, now I'm in the universal camera. I'm just messing with some different... I'm not super familiar with it, so I was just sort of pushing myself into the unknown a little bit with it to just try and see what could happen. I'm messing with the different parameters because I did it on my Xbox Series S render, and it was on like a beach. I actually used the universal camera for that, and that was the first time I'd really exported a render with it. But I'm not really super tuned up to the values and what changes what. So I was going into it a little bit and seeing what I could change, but I don't know if I ended up actually exporting it in the final render or not. And I like the way that you can add like fake motion blur really easily. I think that's quite cool. So this is the interesting part. This is where I add in the third can. And kind of seeing what would work with that. And I end up putting it leaning over the two cans that were already there. That's what's nice about when you set your scene up correctly as well, is, you know, you can afford to just duplicate things and move things around, and it's just going to look nice kind of straight away. So I think I use a little bit of that dynamic place tool as well, just to make sure that the cans are colliding with one another correctly. I quite like this tool. It's quite useful just to be able to push something down and not have to worry about it all touching in you know, such a precise manner. It's a very useful tool. And then I push the can further forward just so the kind of pile of cans are sitting together in a less spread out way. You can see I do that there. I had to fix the axis first. And you can see there we've kind of got a final image building now. Not a whole lot left going on. Again, now it's just coming back to tweaking lights and changing saturation values, and you know, I do a lot of work in the camera imager to make an image look correct. I don't really do any post on my renders. I'm nearly always working in the camera imager. I don't really grade my renders anymore, so I always tend to do that color correction in real time and make sure that everything pops the way I want it to. And that's pretty much the final image. I don't really change anything else now. I just set everything up and get ready to render. Mess with the cameras a little bit more, make sure that it looks good in square, make sure it looks good in wide, and I render out all my square images in 240 by 248, and I render out all my wide images in 2560 by 1440. And that's pretty much that. That's me going into the renders now. So thank you for watching this one. This one ran a little bit quicker than the Xbox one that I did, and there was less issues in the process, but I think it's good to show this and dissect it and pull it apart. Still certainly some cool workflow tips and you know, value to be gained here. I think it's good to follow along with stuff like this, you know, sometimes a step-by-step tutorial. I think I remember actually cancelling the render here and straightening up the can again after I stretched out, but you know, you're going to learn a lot more within experimentation. So to give people guidelines like this and to give people an outline and then follow that, you're going to push your skills a lot more than if you just follow a step-by-step tutorial, although it's more satisfying to get yourself to that result. And it does have utility. I think this is something I want to do more of and dissect my process and pull it apart. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to do a lot more of these and try and record my renders a lot more and you know, talk over them and pull apart the process. Make sure you go check out my Patreon. I'm really trying to post more over there and get super consistent with it and really provide a lot of value over there and just kind of get really raw with the renders that I'm making. I hope you enjoyed this one. And let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if you want any info. I might make a proper scene breakdown of this over on Patreon and really go into everything and show everything in detail. So let me know if you want that. And thanks for watching this video. I will see you in another tutorial very soon.